Well, hello. I'm Pastor Brandon Ray at Faith Baptist Church here in Kirksville, Missouri, and we're continuing our study on plagues and pestilences from Numbers chapter 11, verse 33. This is part 9 in our series, and last time we looked at Numbers chapter 8. If you remember, the first 10 chapters of Numbers is about order. The last chapters of Numbers, 26 to the end, is about order, but right in the middle, sandwiched in between these, is a large section on disorder due to disobedience and their sin, the people's sin of Israel. And that starts here in chapter 11. Notice in verse 1 it says, "And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed them, some outlying parts of the camp." So right immediately, verse 1 of chapter 11, it switches from order, everyone's following, obeying, to now the people are in the middle of the wilderness, and now they complain, and immediately God sends forth fire. Again, they complain in chapter 11 because they're tired of eating just the manna. They want some meat. So God says, starting in chapter 30, verse 31, that He will bring a wind that will bring quail. And so they bring the quail to the camp. It's both in front a day's journey, behind a day's journey. This quail has surrounded the camp, and it says that it's up to 3 feet high. So either the quail, because the wind were coming down and flying at 3 feet high, and so it was easy to catch them, or they were catching them so much that the piles of quail, dead quail, were 3 feet high off the ground. If you're a bird hunter, this would be just the most idealistic circumstances to go hunting. And it says in verse 32 that they hunted day, night, and into the next day. And that the least among them gathered 60 bushels of quail. The least. I think people gathered much more than that. And it says in verse 33, "While the meat was yet between their teeth before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck down the people with a very great plague." So they complained against God. God said, "Oh, you want meat? I'll give you meat, and it's going to be gushing out of your teeth." And then He strikes them with the plague because of their grumbling. Elsewhere in the Bible, in Psalm 106:15, it says, "He gave them what they asked, but sent a wasting disease among them." Psalm 78:30 and 31 says, "But before they had satisfied their craving, while the food was still in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them, and He killed the strongest of them, and laid low the young men of Israel." Hence, in verse 34, they call the place Kibroth Hattaavah, because they buried the people who had the craving. And that name in Hebrew means the graves of craving. So this is the place, the cemetery of those who grumbled and complained because they wanted to find their satisfaction in meat instead of finding their satisfaction in God. Now, there are several lessons that we can learn from this in our day. Number one, do not grumble. And think of before the coronavirus hit, how we would grumble about maybe your job, the traffic that you had to endure, the gas prices, especially for you in Illinois, the hiking of the prices, 20-25 cents, commodity prices, corn, soybeans, cattle, maybe fellow church members or people who attended who are visitors that annoyed you, the government. Maybe you're saying, well, we're just too busy, we don't have enough family time. And now that the coronavirus has taken place and the response by the government, now are you complaining because you don't have a job, or you're not making as much money as you once thought? Are you complaining because of food and toilet paper shortages? Are you complaining because of your stay-at-home order? Are you now grumbling because you can't go to church and see those church members that you had previously complained about? Are you now grumbling because the commodity prices have gotten lower than what you thought? You went from saying I'm too busy to now I'm too bored. From I had too much family time to now or too little family time? Do I have too much family time? I mean, now we're complaining about the government even more than we had previously. You see, our circumstances have changed, but yet our grumbling continues. Has God changed? Has He changed His attributes or His means or His purposes? No. And yet we are so prone to continue to grumble and complain. What does grumbling reveal about us? Grumbling is a direct attack on God's character. We are saying, God, you are not good, or God, you are not wise, or God, you are not loving. Because what you have for me right now is not for my good according to my wisdom. Well, friends, instead of grumbling, we should question our own thoughts, our own wisdom. Here's what Stephen Charnock wrote, the Puritan pastor. To condemn God one moment is more base than if all creatures were condemned by us forever. Because the excellency of creatures is to God like that of a drop to the sea, or a spark to the glory of unconceivable millions of suns. As much as the excellency of God is above ours conceptions, so much doth the debasing of Him admit of unexpressible aggravations. So he's saying, it'd be better to complain and debase all creatures forever than to do it in 1 second of one moment in time towards God. Why? Because creatures are like a drop in comparison to the volume of God, who is the sea. And His glory is like unconceivable suns, millions of suns, whereas creatures is like a spark. And yet we are so quick to do this. Friends, when we start complaining, we need to stop ourselves and ask, are we wiser than God? Why am I questioning God's goodness? What is it that I want so badly that I'm willing to slander the character and nature of God because I am so angry that I'm not getting what I want? Are you willing to lie about who God is because you are so angry with not getting what you want? Maybe you want to be able to go outside. You want to go out to eat. You want to have the economy going again. You want to get back to your job. You want to get back to your old way of things. You want to have comfort and ease. You don't have to have regulations. You want to have independence. And you so badly want this that when we grumble, when we mutter under our breath, when we have these thoughts, what we're saying is, you, God, who is sovereign and in charge, your plan for me right now is wrong. And by doing so, we are forgetting what God says in Romans 8:28, if you're a believer. For we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those whom He called according to His purpose. For those who foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son. So that God works all things for our good if we're Christians, and the primary good is that He would use this not to give us comfort and ease, but to mold, shape, transform us more and more to be like Jesus. Especially as we think about this time of year, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and then Resurrection Sunday. Thankfully, Jesus didn't put comfort and ease at the top of His priorities for us, but instead He put doing the Father's will and carrying out the plan of redemption. So what should we do? Instead of grumbling, we should rejoice. Replace it with rejoicing. Philippians 4:4 says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. This is from the pen of Paul, who was imprisoned in Rome, and he's saying rejoice, and he tells us to do that several times in that letter. 1 Timothy 6:8 says, but if you have food and clothing, with these we will be content. Friends, do you have food right now in your refrigerator or in the cabinets? Do you have clothing? Do you have a washer and dryer or someone that can clean it for you? Do you have clothing in your closet? Do you have several sets? Well, if you have those two things, then you can be content, even in a coronavirus stay-at-home order where everything's locked down. You can find your joy not in your circumstances, but in the Lord who never changes. So let us learn this example and not imitate the Israelites in the wilderness who grumbled and complained, which is a despicable, ugly, vile sin. But instead, may we shine like the stars in the sky with our rejoicing, our praising, and our glorifying God in the midst of trials and tribulations. Well, now let us close with this benediction. Colossians 3:15 says, "And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful." May we meditate that because Christ came in the incarnation, because He planned for Judas to betray Him, because He was put on trial and whipped and scorned and mocked, because He was crucified on the tree at Calvary and died, and 3 days later was raised, because of His great trials and His sacrifice, we do not go to hell if we trust in Him. Friends, brethren, how much more thankful should we be than anyone else? What more could be given to you than eternal life, for which would add a cherry to the topping of the dessert of thankfulness that we should have? Let us meditate this season, this time, and these circumstances to say, there's something worse than being trapped in your home. It's being trapped in hell. God bless.